Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really wild theory about one of the most famous figures in all of history, one that might just flip the script on a story you thought you knew. All right, let's just jump right in with the big provocative question that's at the heart of this whole thing. It's part of a theory called religion in the gray, and it asks us to think about the Exodus story not as scripture, but as maybe the most successful piece of political rebranding ever. So the core idea here is that the Exodus wasn't a slave revolt at all. Not really. It was actually a nasty internal power struggle inside the Egyptian royal family. A full-blown political schism. One faction lost big time and was forced out, taking a whole bunch of people with them. Now, here's a really crucial piece of the puzzle. This theory argues that monotheism, the belief in one god, wasn't some brand new idea. Think of it more like an old, faded memory. An ancestral memory of a single creator that was floating around the ancient world long before all the Egyptian gods showed up. So an educated Egyptian royal wouldn't need to invent this idea from scratch. They just have to tap into this old, suppressed belief and, formalize it, turn it into the bedrock for a whole new national identity. Okay, this is where it gets juicy. If Moses was a real person, a royal prince who got into some serious trouble, who was he? The theory says Moses is just a placeholder, a name used to cover up the real identity of a guy whose scandal was so huge, he had to be literally erased from the family tree. All right, so the theorists have narrowed it down to 4 main suspects, and each one tells a slightly different story. First up, we've got Proposal 1, Prince Thutmose. He was the original heir, the crown prince, and then, poof, he just vanishes from all historical records. The theory? He killed another royal and had to get out of Dodge, fast. Proposal 2 points the finger at his uncle, Prince Amenhotep. This would have been a violent family coup, and the proof is that someone went to a lot of trouble to chisel his name off of monuments. Now, Proposal 3 is a bit of a twist. What if some unknown royal murdered the heir, Thutmose? Well, to avoid a civil war, the dynasty would have to erase both the killer and the victim. Just pretend the whole ugly thing never happened. And last, Proposal 4, which is less about murder and more about treason. A high-ranking ambassador who switched sides, becoming an enemy of the state and taking a whole population with him. Each of these guys could have committed a crime big enough to get wiped from history. And you might be thinking, how does a prince just disappear? Well, the Egyptians had a specific tool for that. This quote nails it. Damnatio memoria wasn't just forgetting someone. It was an official political act. The ancient world's version of getting canceled and having your entire digital footprint wiped clean. They would literally chisel your name off of buildings. It was all about protecting the brand, preserving the illusion that the divine royal family was perfect. Okay, so we have some possible suspects and a motive for why they'd be erased from Egyptian history. But that leads to another huge question. Why would this prince lead his people for decades, only to be told he couldn't enter the promised land himself? The traditional story has a religious answer, but this theory suggests a much more practical, geopolitical one. So the reason we usually hear is that he sinned, right? He struck a rock when he was supposed to speak to it. But what if that was just a convenient cover story? The geopolitical reason is way more compelling. At the time, Canaan was basically under Egyptian control, or at the very least, heavy influence. So if a former Egyptian prince marches an army in there, that doesn't look like a liberation. It looks like Egypt just reconquering its own territory under a new general. It would completely undermine the whole independence movement. This analogy puts it in perfect perspective. Can you imagine? It would be a political nightmare. Nobody would buy it. Moses' very identity was a massive political liability. He was the empire they were trying to escape. For the new nation to have any legitimacy, it had to be seen as truly free from Egypt. And that meant its Egyptian-born leader, the very symbol of their past, simply could not be part of their future. He had to be left behind. So, when you put it all together, the religion in the gray theory paints a fascinating picture. It suggests this new nation was born from a really unique recipe. You take the insider knowledge and advanced military training of a high-ranking Egyptian defector, you mix that with those old, pre-existing beliefs in a single god, and you use it all to transform a population of subjects into a brand new sovereign nation. And that's really the question this whole explainer leaves us with. It forces us to ask, if history is written by the victors, then what or who had to be erased to create this incredibly powerful and enduring legend? It makes you look again at that gray area between the history we read in books and the myths that shape our world.